Our church is rich with history. All of us who come to worship here at First United Methodist Church should be eternally grateful to all those persons who have given unconditionally of their time and talents. Our church exists because of good and faithful parishioners and pastors who had a great desire of spreading the good news of Jesus Christ to others in our community. Our God had a plan in 1885 when people gathered and prayed under the tree, establishing a church at Rockwell where First Methodist came to be. In 1886, land was donated, a building built. Worship there continued until 1889, when Albertus Vaught bought the church to house his equine. About 1900, Dunnellon was booming. Phosphate mines were where many people's feet trod. So Methodists built another church in town, what better place to claim for our God. In 1901, it became a church and public schoolhouse. Guess we wanted a different mold. So when Beulah Baptist showed an interest, we just up and sold. In 1903, through the help of a Jewish merchant, our first $100 was raised. The building went up at the corner of Ohio and Chestnut. We were small in membership, but large in praise. In 1975, we demolished the old church to rebuild on the same site. Furnishings were new and recycled old pieces. We thank God through worship with all our might. In 2003, we'll be moving again. 100 years we've served Christ here. A new location and a new church awaits. Our memories are rooted, we'll hold them dear. God gave a vision, the future 40 West. A faithful few volunteers carried the ball. Celebrate Jesus, a reality, by sharing God's light. This could only have been done under God's mighty call. First United Methodist Church, lovest thou me? Lord, you know we do. Then feed and tend my lambs and sheep. Let your faithfulness show through. Written by Lela Evers. From the history of the First United Methodist Church on 8/5/2003. I am Lela Riley Evers, and I've been a member of this First United Methodist Church for 81 years in October the 11th. I joined when I was 8 years old, and I had been raised in the Baptist church. Prior to that, I was a member of the Sunbeams in the Baptist church, and my mother would take us over across town to the where the old Baptist church was located, where the Lions Club is today. And I would, my sister Gladys and I would go, and then Mother would go with us sometimes and stay with us, and because it was across town, and she would either have to go back to pick us up or just stay there with us. And a funny thing happened at one of our Sunbeam classes. My sister Gladys, the teacher, asked us if anybody had a little church song that they wanted to sing. And my sister Gladys kept raising her hand, and my mother kept putting her hand back down, and she just kept insisting on raising her hand. And so my mother said, the teacher finally said, Gladys, you've been putting your hand up. What little church song do you want to sing for us? And she said, Birmingham Jail. And my mother almost flipped out of the seat. And she realized, she went home and told my daddy that when we would go rabbit hunting in the afternoon sometimes, riding through the open range, the pastures, they would sing all kind of old songs. My mother and daddy would harmonize together, and that's the reason my sister had learned all these old songs that they knew. And my mother said, well, from now on we're going to sing some little church songs, and that's where this little light of mine came about in our relationship in the Baptist church. Was we learned to sing this little light of mine. And Mama and Daddy saw to it that when we went riding, it wasn't just their songs that were sung but by the family, but also we were taught little church songs. And so that really was more or less my beginning. And the reason that I became a Methodist at that time was because my grandmother became bedridden with cancer, and we lived in an old frame house, and it had the shake shingles on the top. And once in a while, when she had an old wood stove to cook on, the shingles would catch fire up on the roof, and they'd have to get the hose and put it out. So Mother was afraid, with grandmother being bedridden, she was afraid to drive us across town to the Baptist church that we were used to attending, because she was afraid a fire would start and there wouldn't be anybody, and she couldn't get grandma out of the bed, in time. So this is why we started going to the Methodist church. It was just up the corner from where we lived, and Ms. Parker would take her children, Buddy Parker and the other family members, and they would walk up to the Methodist church. So Mother talked with Miss Parker, and she said she'd be glad for us to walk up to the church with her. But Mother said, well, I won't put the responsibility of my two children on you during service time, the church time, but for Sunday school, I'll be glad to have them with me. And so that's how we started attending the Methodist church. And of course, there were a group of us children that played ball together and played other games together in the neighborhood. And so all of us as a group, they had a revival at the Methodist church. And on the 4th of October, we kids went forward as a group. And when the preacher had called for anyone to come forward that wanted to join the church. So the pastor at that time, I don't remember who he was at that time, but he knew that my family was Baptist, so he went to he came to see my mother and spoke with her, and my mother said, I joined the church when I was a girl, and it has helped me all through the years. And if my children want to join the church in a different church, if that's what they want to do, then they are old enough to make that decision. So she allowed us to join the Methodist church, and we did that on October the 11th in 1936. I've been a member of this First United Methodist Church for 81 years. I had made the remark that if you all wanted to do your math, if you would subtract 1936 from 2017, you'll come out with the 81 age. It does show that I didn't get to go and be gone a long time anywhere. I never lived anywhere else but Dunnellon, but it supplied our needs. We love the woods, and we love the lakes and the rivers, and in particular what we called it Blue Run in that day, but it became Rainbow River through the years since then. And there was so much to offer us here, and then it was open land, and we could ride through the woods and didn't have fences like they do today in that day. And my daddy would take us most every afternoon and after his work, and we would ride through the woods, and my mother and daddy liked to sing, and they would harmonize together, and I never could carry a tune. I wasn't blessed with a good voice, and my sister could, though, and she would harmonize with them, and but they would politely ask me, honey, do you mind sitting this one out? So I still haven't gotten to be good. When I open my hymnal in the church now every Sunday morning, I can only read the words. I don't know the rest of how to read the music and do it in the proper way, but I make a joyful noise unto the Lord. We'll leave it there. I would like to share with you the back of the bulletin that was made. This is a copy of the bulletin that was made in 1936 when I joined the church, And one of the things that's so special about it is that we didn't have all the equipment then, machine to make up our own bulletins, and we had to send them to Ocala to be made. And the way we paid for them is that we sold the little squares. Some, if you notice on this, are larger in dimension than others, and like they did at the school for the plays and all, they would go around town and they would sell squares on their programs, and so we sold squares, but mostly within our church family. We did venture out, and those who knew about it, that we needed to have our bulletins made up, they would want to advertise their business, and we advertised on the backs of our bulletins, as this old bulletin from 1936 shows you the way we advertised at that time to get our bulletins made up. And we're so thankful that the people wanted to advertise their businesses with us. And while I'm speaking of businesses, I would like to give mention to one in particular, that Lela Bridges ran a filling station, and he was about one of the only stations in town that you could buy kerosene from. And Lela, for his tithing, Lela would furnish all of the kerosene for our church. We had kerosene heaters in those days, and in particular in the Sunday school rooms, we would have the little heaters. They were built up very much like the kerosene stoves were, and in that day. And one time in particular, Ruth Henson was the leader of our Sunday school at that time, and it was upstairs in the old house that we had bought, and Barganier house that we had bought, that was located near our old sanctuary. And she was upstairs with her class, and one of the burners on the kerosene stove flooded out, and it was glowing fire pretty high, and she picked that little stove up and came downstairs and went outside and smothered it out, tried to turn it off, but for whatever was wrong with it, it wouldn't turn down any lower, so she smothered it out with something that she found outside. So she actually saved our church that day. So I felt that we should throw that in at this time, because speaking of the kerosene, because they were dangerous that's why we have all the modern things today, and kind of did away with the kerosene heaters and the kerosene stoves at that time. One of the things that I find so special about this church is that, and through the years, is that no one or two people run our church, not even the minister. We have the type of board meetings that different people that hold different jobs in the church make up this board, administrative board, and so their voices, but they represent the people, and the people want to, when they have something that's coming up, and they want to put their voice in, they come to the one who's representing them on the board, and that way we are able to get the voice of more of the people heard through people, but they're also, those people have been contacted by the local congregation as to what they want us to vote for when we come to the administrative board. And I like that part of the business part of the church, because anyone is welcome at the administrative board. It's not just for the members that have offices, and anyone can express their opinions when something comes up. So each person is counted as important, not just those who are, quote, running the church, so to speak. And I like that system about our church, where the voices are heard by everybody has a voice. And then I like the way it's carried on that we have an offertory, we always turn and look at the cross that's on the podium here when we do our offering and our doxology, and I like that. Some people don't like the 11 o'clock service, which is the one I attend and have attended all through life, because it's supposed to be more of a formal type church, but we do provide for the needs of everybody in our church. We have an 8 o'clock service for those who want to go and leave early and go visit their loved ones that live maybe only 30 minutes drive from here, and they can spend the afternoon with them, and so it's their choice whether they want to get up early and be here at the 8 o'clock service. Or then we have a contemporary service. If you notice behind me, if you can see them, there is drum sets and all kinds of instruments that the band would be using. And at the 9:30 service, for those who like a contemporary type of service, it's available too. So I think this is good. It doesn't just meet the needs of one type of person. It meets all of our needs, and I like that about our church. And of course, I don't need to say it, but I will say it. Our pastor Eddie is loved by all of the congregation. He always remembers the children with his bully wink bullfrog story, and if you look around the congregation, everybody's hands going up from the Withlacoochee River and a long time ago, and everybody's got a smile on their face, and they are participating with him in the stories for the children. And also there's an ongoing challenge between the Tallahassee team and the Gainesville with the I'm not going to name the names of the team. I'm just going to name the places they're from. And so the way that they do their hands to acknowledge each team, which one is playing at the time, and which one they're hoping will win at the time, and it becomes a laughter time. And I spoke with Reverend Eddie one time. He also does it with his fried chicken. You can expect somewhere in his sermon you're going to hear about fried chicken. And the way he can put it into his sermon just thrills everybody. You can look around again and see that people are enjoying it and they're laughing. And I spoke to him about it one time, and I said, I know what you're doing, Eddie. Laughter is, as they said, is the best medicine. And when you are doing things like that bring laughter to your congregation, in one sense you're putting a healing touch upon them. And I like that. I like the way he does that. He's healing along with his with the telling a joke or challenging someone with the ball games. And when I picked up on the people doing so much laughter at the time, and I've always belonged to a prayer group, and we realized that to have a jolly countenance, and even when you're sick, you know you have something wrong with you, to face it with God's help, and also to not face it with a defeated outlook, but because of prayer, you know, if you're being prayed for, that whatever comes of it, of your illness, is in the hands of the Lord. And I like the fact that we have an altar within our sanctuary, and we also have one in our prayer room. And if people want to come to the altar and kneel and pray, it's all right. To say something a little bit negative, along with all this positive I've given to you, through the latter years, we have had to lock our sanctuary doors. We've had to lock all of our church doors. And in the old churches, they were always open. The Sunday school teachers could go up and prepare their lessons and prepare their room for the children on Sundays. and the sanctuaries were always left open in that day, but in today's world they have to be closed or they would not have anything left on the altars or anything left on the table or anywhere in the church, if anything that could be stolen and sold. And this to me is a tragedy, because one incident that I'd like to share about the altar rail, I was going up one Sunday to fix my Sunday school room, and as I opened the old church door, it didn't squeak, believe it or not, but when I opened it, there was a man, and he was a band leader in the school band, and he was on his knees at that altar, and I really felt like I was standing on sacred ground, and so I just easily backed back out and closed the door, and he didn't hear me when I came to come in, but we missed that. It's not open anymore, but we understand why it's not open anymore, and our prayers go out to those who they're beginning to fight we're beginning to try to help those that are have so many drugs nowadays that they'll do anything, even rob the churches. And we're also, in our churches now, we've had to incorporate people who watch to protect our ministers and protect our congregation, because there's much shooting that's being done, and they aim at the churches that are preaching Jesus Christ. And so this is some of the changes that have been for the worse, not the best. They're for the best because of circumstances, but they're not the best as far as me walking in and feeling I was on holy ground when I saw that man on his knees at the altar rail. So we miss a lot, and yet we're gaining a lot too. And we have pictures of our 3 old churches. Ruth Riley was more or less a town historian and our church historian, she and Maxie Lowe. And we do have a booklet with the history of all the ministers who served here. And I think there's one in the library if you care to read it. And it's mostly about what each minister contributed to our congregation when they were serving us. And one of them we owned a church. It was on a circuit. We had the circuit riders. One of the churches that they went to was Cedar Cove, and it's located off of 200 back in the woods, and it was given by Jordan. We have a Jordan family that still worships with us in the 8 o'clock service, who's a branch of that Jordan family that donated the land for a church to be built there. And but we sold it because of the cemetery. There's always a story behind everything. And when Reverend Sharp was here, the church out there was abandoned, but it had a cemetery connected with it, like most of the old churches did in that day. But because of the cemetery, you couldn't sell the church. You couldn't sell a cemetery. So they formed a group. We talked with the relative of Mr. Jordan who donated the land, and we spoke with him. And he said that they wanted people who have loved ones buried out there, they wanted to be able to still go and be a part of the putting flowers and having loved ones still buried out there next to their other family members. So we encouraged them to form a cemetery association, much like the one we have at Rockwell, and this way it could be sold. And for I think the sum of $10, Reverend Sharp sold the cemetery to the Jordan family. So not to just the Jordan, but when they formed an organization of the cemetery organization, they sold it to that organization. And So now they don't have to worry about their cemeteries, their loved ones, and they can still place the oncoming family members by the old members, and it's been for the good. But it was when we had circuit riders that we had purchased that church in the beginning, or built that church in the beginning. Our pastor for this church had to travel to Cotton Plant to the church there, and then they would go to Cedar Grove, and the pastor served 3 or 4 different churches during the early years of our church that was located here. But Cedar Cove, when I visited there with my mother and family one time, the organ was still there, and it was the player type organ in there, and there was a bird nest in the organ at the time, so the bird was doing the singing for the choir at that time, but you didn't see too many of the player pianos around. I think there was probably 2 that I had heard of. One was there in that old church that was falling down at the time. And one of the reasons we wanted to sell it, to back up a minute, was because we had to furnish insurance, and people were going in and tearing up and getting pieces of wood, even the wood off of the altar rail and things, because it was the old wood. They wanted the old wood to make things out of. And mentioning that, here I am, be reminded of another story. When we left the church that we built in 1975 and came into this new sanctuary, Bob Burks was real good with woodwork, and he took the racks that held the books in our old church off of the pews. They sold the benches, the pews, but he took the racks and he made churches out of the wood from the racks and made the cross, the United Methodist Church cross. You can't see it too well here, but it's this shape, and this is the way he made the flame and the flame and the cross together that he cut out of the old pews, and I was fortunate enough that he gave me one. And as long as that wood lasted from the old church pews, they were given to everybody when they joined the church. That was one of Bob Burke's ministries, was to make those little churches in the flame. That's our symbolic emblem of our Methodist church, is the flame in the church, the flame in the cross. And it meant something to all of us like me that had been a member for so many years and had worshiped in that. Well, it was the 3rd church, really, that we had in town, and then we came out here. I've always belonged to a prayer group. I believe very strongly in prayer, and already my name is out on a leaf. We have, one of the ladies had donated a tree, and they put the leaves on the trees of people, and it was supposed to, I think in the beginning, from what I was told, it was supposed to have been for the people who had passed away, and they could put a leaf on the tree for their loved ones. But somehow or other, when Fred Kingery, and he was one of the instigators of building this church, and he understood it that was you could buy a leaf in honor of someone, not just in memory of someone. And my name is out there as a member of the Somebody Cares prayer ministry that Fred Kingery was the head of, and Charlie Skinner was the head of it at one time also, and it's still going on in the church. So we meet on Wednesday afternoon at 3:30 and pray for. If you've ever noticed the little churches and the restaurants and in the communities, or even in the laundromat, any of the little church buildings, they were really little bird houses with a steeple on them, but they're just for prayer. So many people work, shift work, and they can't always come to church. We do have a Wednesday night service for those who miss Sunday services, but sometimes they have to work all week on one schedule and they can't come to church either time. So if they have problems in their family, that we all do, and they need prayer, all we want you to do is just write your prayer request, and we meet and we pray for those. We have a beautiful group of ladies that pick them up every week, and we pray over them then every week, and other people in the church have access for them to pray over. But all of our prayers are very private, that you send through your offering plate on Sundays. You send a section of your bulletin with a prayer request on it, and when we meet, on the backs of the bulletins, now in today's bulletin, you have a list of those intercessors that you're interceding for in prayer, and the homebound and the rehab. But what we get, they just have a name, and what we get is the purpose, the reason for their name to be on there. So of course that has to be a personal thing. When someone has written there, some of the prayers break your heart, because I'm sure they break the heart of God too, that because they seem to be so desperate sometimes in their prayers, and just seem to be not able to just leave it in the hands of God to work it out with you. And we pray harder for those kind of people that seem to be, they've met a dead end and can't go any further. And so that's always meant an awful lot to me. And so that's where I do with my condition, with my legs and my knees. Nowadays, that's about the only ministry in the church that I can be involved in. But at one time, I was with the youth, and I was the community coordinator, and I did a lot of picture taking at one time when I was head of the communications. I also would take a group. I would write about some kind of activity that we had, and I would drive it out to the filling station in Citrus Springs, and this is when it first opened up. And I would be written about something that had taken place in Friendship Hall at our old church, in our Friendship Hall, and I would write the story and take it out to that station out there, and the people that were writing for the newspaper out there would put it in their newspaper. One of the men said, it wasn't one of the ladies, said, "I didn't think you were going to ever quit writing, just like y'all think I'm never going to quit talking." I believe in the Bible. I've spoke about being an average in the prayer groups, but we have had cottage prayer meetings, and we have also had meetings up at the church that we've had studied the Bible. But that's where we get the foundation for knowing how to come to our God, is through Jesus Christ, His Son, and the fact that He rose from the dead. And He's sitting now at the right hand of God the Father in heaven. And one thing that comforts me so much is to know that He, and also a great multitude of others that have gone before me and before other members of you all, they're gathered around Jesus as He's sitting there at the right hand of God, and they're praying for us here. Here we go to a prayer meeting, and we're praying for the people here, but they are also gathered in heaven praying for us. And that's one of the things that warms my heart so much, is because I believe so strongly in prayer, and to know that Jesus is praying for us, that we won't stumble and fall, and that we can stay on course. It makes me feel comfortable in that sense.